When my sister Victoria burst into laughter after hearing I wasn't mentioned in our father's will, I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces. But what she didn't know was that our family lawyer had one more page to read, and what was written there would change everything. My name is Elena Martinez, and I'm about to tell you the most incredible story of betrayal, forgiveness, and justice that you've ever heard. This isn't just about money or inheritance. This is about discovering who your family really is when everything is on the line. It was a gray October morning in Chicago when I received the call that would turn my world upside down. The voice on the other end was professional, distant. "Miss Martinez? This is James Whitfield from Whitfield and Associates. I'm calling to inform you that your father, Roberto Martinez, passed away 3 days ago. The funeral arrangements have been made, and there will be a reading of the will afterward." I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely pick it up again. Dad was gone. The man who taught me how to ride a bike, who stayed up all night helping me with my college applications, who called me every Sunday without fail, was gone. I hadn't spoken to him in 2 years, not since the big fight about my career choices. I was working as a social worker in the South Side, helping underprivileged families, while Victoria had followed in his footsteps, taking over his construction company. He thought I was wasting my education, my potential. I thought he didn't understand my passion for helping others. 2 years of stubborn silence, and now it was too late. The funeral was held at St. Mary's Cathedral, the same church where my parents got married 35 years ago. I sat in the back, watching as Victoria played the grieving daughter perfectly. She wore a black Chanel dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief while accepting condolences from business partners and family friends. I wore my only black dress, a simple one I'd bought at Target 3 years ago. My hands were rough from volunteer work, my shoes scuffed from walking through the neighborhoods where I worked. Next to Victoria, I looked like exactly what I was, the daughter who had chosen a different path. After the service, about 20 people gathered at the law office for the reading of the will. Victoria sat in the front row, her husband Marcus beside her, both of them looking confident and composed. I sat near the back, feeling like an intruder in my own family's final moment. James Whitfield adjusted his glasses and began to read. His voice echoed in the mahogany-paneled room, formal and final. "I, Roberto Martinez, being of sound mind and body, do hereby distribute my assets as follows." He read through the technical language, the legal jargon that seemed to go on forever. Then came the real bequests. To various charities and organizations that were important to me throughout my life, I leave the sum of $200,000 to be distributed as detailed in Schedule A. Victoria shifted in her seat. That was more than she'd expected to go to charity. To my loyal employees at Martinez Construction, I establish a pension fund in the amount of $500,000, ensuring their security and recognizing their years of dedicated service. Now Victoria was frowning. The amounts were getting larger than she'd anticipated. To my daughter Victoria Martinez Blackwood, I leave my house at 12-47 Maple Avenue, along with all its contents, my collection of vintage cars, and the sum of $300,000. Victoria smiled, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. The house was worth at least $800,000, the car collection another $200,000. But where was the business? Where were the real assets? The lawyer paused, looking around the room. His eyes found mine for just a moment, and I swear I saw something there. Pity? Sympathy? I couldn't tell. And that concludes the main bequests of Roberto Martinez's will. The silence in the room was deafening. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Not mentioned. Not even a family photo or a book. Nothing. After 32 years of being his daughter, I had been completely erased from his final act. Victoria turned around to look at me, and that's when she started laughing. Not a little chuckle, but a full, throaty laugh that echoed off the walls of that serious, somber room. "Oh my God, Elena," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You're not even mentioned. Dad really meant it when he said you were dead to him after you chose to throw your life away helping losers instead of building something meaningful. The words hit me like physical blows. People were staring, some looking uncomfortable, others hiding smirks behind their hands. This was my family. These were people who had known me since I was a child, and they were watching my humiliation like it was entertainment. I stood up, my legs shaky, ready to leave with whatever dignity I had left. But then James Whitfield cleared his throat. "Actually," he said, his voice cutting through Victoria's laughter, "there is one more page." Victoria's laughter died instantly. The room went completely silent. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, looking directly at Victoria, "your father specifically requested that you read this final page aloud to everyone present." He handed her a single sheet of paper. Victoria's face had gone pale, but she took it with trembling hands. She looked at it, and I saw her eyes widen in shock. "Read it," the lawyer said firmly. "It was your father's explicit wish." Victoria's voice was barely a whisper as she began to read, but the lawyer gestured for her to speak louder. "To those gathered here today," she read, her voice getting stronger but filled with confusion, "you have just witnessed something that breaks my heart but needed to happen. You have seen my daughter Victoria laugh at her sister's exclusion from my will. You have seen her cruelty, her lack of compassion, her assumption that material success is the only measure of a person's worth." Victoria stopped reading, her face now completely white. I don't understand." "Keep reading," James Whitfield said gently but firmly. "You have also seen my daughter Elena, who despite our disagreements, despite my own stubborn pride, chose to dedicate her life to helping others, who never asked me for money, who never expected anything from me, who loved me enough to do what she believed was right, even when it cost her my approval." Tears were starting to stream down my face. This didn't make sense. If he felt this way, why had he cut me out? Victoria continued, her voice now shaking. "It is for this reason that I must reveal the truth. Everything I have left to Victoria, the house, the cars, the money, represents only 15% of my total estate. The other 85%, including Martinez Construction Company, all remaining bank accounts, investment portfolios, and properties, I leave to my daughter Elena Martinez." The paper fell from Victoria's hands. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. I felt like the world was spinning around me, but Victoria wasn't finished reading. James Whitfield picked up the paper and handed it back to her. "The last paragraph, please." With a voice barely above a whisper, Victoria read, "Elena, my beautiful daughter, I was wrong. I was proud and stubborn, and I let my fear of losing you drive us apart. You chose love over money, service over profit, compassion over success as I defined it. You are everything I raised you to be, and everything I was too proud to acknowledge. I pray you can forgive a foolish old man who realized too late that you were the daughter who truly understood what it means to build something meaningful. The business is yours now. Use it to help others, as I know you will." The silence that followed was profound. Victoria sat staring at the paper like it might burst into flames. Marcus had his arm around her, but she was rigid, unmoving. I couldn't process what had just happened. The last 2 years of silence, the hurt, the feeling of being rejected and abandoned by the man who had been my hero. And all along, he had been planning this. "There's more," James Whitfield said softly. He handed me an envelope with my name written in my father's handwriting. "This is for you, Miss Martinez. He asked me to give it to you after the will was read." With shaking hands, I opened the envelope my father had left for me. Inside was a letter written in his familiar handwriting, and as I read the first lines, I felt my knees buckle. "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, then you have just experienced what I can only imagine was a terrible few minutes of believing that I had abandoned you. I am so sorry for that pain, but I needed everyone in that room to see who you really are and who your sister has become." I looked up to find the entire room staring at me. Victoria was still sitting frozen, the will document crumpled in her lap. Some people were whispering to each other. Others were just staring in shock. "Would you like to step outside to read that?" James Whitfield asked kindly. I nodded, unable to speak, and followed him out of the conference room into a smaller office. He closed the door behind us, giving me privacy to process what my father had written. I sat down in a leather chair that still smelled like my dad's cologne. Old Spice mixed with sawdust from the construction sites. The familiar scent made tears flow even harder as I continued reading. "Elena, I need you to understand something. When you chose to become a social worker, when you decided to help families in the South Side instead of joining the business, I wasn't disappointed in your choice. I was terrified. I was terrified because I knew you were better than me. You were kinder, more compassionate, more willing to sacrifice for others. I built Martinez Construction to make money, to provide for our family. You chose to build something more important. You chose to build hope." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. Outside the office, I could hear raised voices. Victoria and Marcus were arguing with someone, probably about the validity of the will. "I want you to know that I followed your work, Elena. I knew about the family you helped get back on their feet after the fire on Ashland Avenue. I knew about the scholarship fund you started for kids in your neighborhood. I knew about the nights you spent at the hospital with Mrs. Chen when her husband was dying, even though she wasn't officially your client. I was so proud of you, and I was such a coward that I couldn't admit I was wrong. I had to stop reading for a moment. Mrs. Chen. How did he know about Mrs. Chen? I had spent 3 weeks helping her navigate the hospital system when her husband was dying of cancer. She didn't speak English well, and the family had no money for a translator. I had used my vacation days to sit with her, to help her understand what the doctors were saying. I had never told anyone about that. How did he know? I continued reading, and the answer became clear. I hired a private investigator, Elena, not to spy on you, but to understand the life you had chosen. I needed to see if I had been right to be disappointed, or if I had been blind. What I found out changed everything. The investigator, Margaret Foster, she told me about your work. But more than that, she told me about who you had become. She said that in 30 years of investigating people, she had never met anyone who had such consistent kindness. Every person she interviewed about you, your colleagues, your clients, even the grocery store clerk in your neighborhood, they all said the same thing. They said you were the kind of person who made the world better just by being in it. Through the office window, I could see the parking lot where people were slowly leaving. Some were talking in small groups, probably discussing what they had just witnessed. Others were walking quickly to their cars, perhaps uncomfortable with the family drama they had just seen unfold. But I also noticed something else. There was a woman standing by a blue Honda Civic, an older woman with gray hair, watching the building. Something about her seemed familiar. Elena, I need you to know that the fight we had 2 years ago, I said things I didn't mean because I was scared. I was scared that you would get hurt, that you would spend your life giving everything to others and have nothing left for yourself. I was scared that you were too good for this world, too trusting. I wanted you to be tougher, more like Victoria. But I was wrong. The world doesn't need more people like Victoria. The world needs more people like you. A knock on the door interrupted my reading. James Whitfield peered in. "Miss Martinez, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there are some practical matters we need to discuss. The business, the properties, there are documents that need to be signed, accounts that need to be transferred, and—" He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Your sister is demanding to contest the will. She's claiming your father wasn't of sound mind when he wrote it." I looked at him, still trying to process everything. "Can she do that?" "She can try," he said. "But I have to tell you, your father anticipated this possibility. He had psychiatric evaluations done just 2 months ago, confirming his mental competency. He also had the will witnessed by 3 doctors and 2 other lawyers. It's ironclad." I folded the letter carefully. I still had more to read, but it would have to wait. "What do I need to do?" "First, we need to go back in there and deal with your sister. Then we'll need to set up meetings to go over the business assets, the properties, everything you've inherited. Miss Martinez, You're now worth approximately $12 million. The number didn't seem real. $12 million. 3 days ago, I was worried about making my rent payment. Now I was, what? Rich? Wealthy? I didn't even know what to call it. We walked back into the conference room where Victoria was pacing back and forth while Marcus sat at the table with his phone out, probably calling lawyers. Elena, Victoria said as soon as she saw me, we need to talk. This is ridiculous. Dad was clearly not thinking straight when he wrote this. You don't know anything about running a business. You'll destroy everything he built. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. Victoria was 2 years older than me, and she had always been the successful one, the pretty one, the smart one, the one who made good choices. Growing up, I had always felt like I was living in her shadow. But now, looking at her face red with anger, her hands clenched into fists, her entire body radiating entitlement and rage, I saw something I had never seen before. I saw someone who had never been told no, someone who had never had to consider that she might not get everything she wanted. Victoria, I said quietly, I didn't ask for this. Then give it back, she snapped. Sign it over to me. You don't want the responsibility anyway. You never wanted to be part of the family business. That's not what Dad wanted. Dad was senile. Mrs. Blackwood, James Whitfield interrupted firmly. I need to remind you that your father was thoroughly evaluated by medical professionals just 2 months ago. He was completely competent when he executed this will. Additionally, he left specific instructions for this situation. He opened another folder and pulled out yet another document. If anyone contests this will, Piquez, he read, they forfeit their inheritance entirely. Victoria, if you pursue legal action against your sister regarding this will, you will lose the house, the cars, and the $300,000. Everything will go to Elena. The room went completely silent. Victoria's face cycled through multiple emotions. Shock, rage, calculation, and finally, something that might have been fear. Marcus grabbed her arm. Victoria, we need to think about this carefully. But Victoria shook him off. She walked over to me and for a moment I thought she might hit me. Instead, she leaned in close and whispered, This isn't over, Elena. You might have fooled Dad with your saint act, but I know who you really are. You're weak, and you're naive, and you have no idea what you're doing. That business will be bankrupt within a year. Then she straightened up, grabbed her purse, and walked toward the door. But she stopped just before leaving and turned back to the room. You all saw what happened here today, she said, addressing everyone still present. My father was manipulated by someone who abandoned the family for 2 years. Elena doesn't care about Dad's legacy or his business. She just wants the money. And when she destroys everything he built, remember that I tried to stop it. With that, she left, Marcus trailing behind her like a lost puppy. The remaining people in the room, a few business associates, some family friends, my Aunt Carmen, they all looked at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to pity to calculation. I could practically see them reassessing their relationship with me, wondering how this change in my circumstances might benefit or complicate their lives. I think that's enough for today, James Whitfield said diplomatically. Miss Martinez, why don't you go home and process all of this? We can meet tomorrow to start going through the business documents. I nodded gratefully. I needed to get out of there, needed time to think, needed to finish reading my father's letter. As I walked to my car, that blue Honda Civic was still in the parking lot, and the gray-haired woman was still there. As I approached my beat-up Ford Focus, she walked over to me. Elena Martinez? She said. Yes? My name is Margaret Foster. I think your father mentioned me in his letter. Margaret Foster, the private investigator my father had hired to learn about my life. Standing there in the parking lot of the law office, she looked nothing like what I had imagined. She was probably in her early 60s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She wore simple clothes. Jeans, a blue sweater, comfortable walking shoes. She looked more like someone's grandmother than a private investigator. He did mention you, I said carefully. You were investigating me. She smiled and shook her head. Not investigating, Elena. Learning about. There's a difference. Your father hired me because he was trying to understand if he had made a mistake. He was trying to figure out if his anger was justified or if his pride was keeping him from seeing the truth. I leaned against my car, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline from the will reading was wearing off, and I felt like I could barely stand. "Would you like to get some coffee?" Margaret asked. "There are some things your father asked me to tell you, but only after the will was read." 20 minutes later, we were sitting in a small diner called Rosie's, just a few blocks from the law office. It was the kind of place my dad used to take me when I was little. Red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floors, and coffee that was strong enough to wake the dead. Margaret ordered coffee and apple pie. I just got coffee. My stomach was too twisted up to think about food. "Your father hired me 8 months ago," Margaret began. "He told me he had made a terrible mistake with his younger daughter, but he was too proud to apologize. He wanted to know if you were really as selfless as you seemed or if it was all an act to make him feel guilty." "What did you find?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "I found someone who was working 50 hours a week at the community center for $32,000 a year when she could have been making 6 figures anywhere else with her master's degree in social work. I found someone who used her own money to buy groceries for families when their food stamps ran out. I found someone who spent her weekends volunteering at 3 different organizations." She paused to take a sip of her coffee, then continued. "But what really convinced your father wasn't the big things, Elena. It was the small things, like how you always parked in the farthest spot from the community center so that families with kids could park closer, like how you kept a box of tissues and granola bars in your desk for clients who were having bad days, like how you learned Spanish and Mandarin on your own time so you could better serve the families in your neighborhood." I was crying again. I seem to be doing a lot of that today. "There was one story in particular that changed everything for your father," Margaret continued. "It was about a family named the Washingtons. Do you remember them?" I nodded. Of course I remembered the Washingtons. Denise Washington was a single mother with 3 kids who had been evicted from their apartment. She had been staying in her car with her children, trying to keep them in the same school district while she saved money for a new place. "I interviewed Mrs. Washington," Margaret said. "She told me that you didn't just help her find housing. You drove her to look at apartments on your days off. You co-signed her lease when no one else would. You helped her kids with their homework while she worked double shifts. And when her youngest daughter needed glasses but Medicaid wouldn't cover them, you paid for them yourself." "It wasn't that much money," I said quietly. "It was $400, Elena. That was more than 10% of your monthly take-home pay at the time." Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila folder. "This is everything I compiled for your father. Every interview, every story, every example of who you are when no one is watching. He read it all, multiple times. And then he called me into his office and cried." He cried? He cried because he realized that he had raised exactly the daughter he had always hoped for, but he had been too focused on success and money to recognize it. He cried because he knew that you had learned to be selfless and kind despite having him as an example, not because of it. She slid the folder across the table to me. "He wanted you to have this. He said it might help you understand how proud he was and how sorry he was for wasting 2 years being stubborn." I opened the folder and immediately saw dozens of photographs. Pictures of me at work, at the community center, at the grocery store with Mrs. Chen, pushing her wheelchair after her husband's funeral. Pictures I had no idea anyone was taking, but they weren't invasive or creepy. They were loving, like someone was documenting proof of goodness in the world. There were also interviews, typed transcripts of conversations with people I had helped, co-workers, neighbors, even my landlord, all describing me in ways that made me sound like a much better person than I felt like I was. "Elena," Margaret said gently, "your father spent the last 8 months of his life trying to figure out how to apologize to you without looking like he was dying." "What do you mean?" "He was sick, honey. Pancreatic cancer. He was diagnosed just a few weeks after your fight. The doctors gave him 6 months to live." The coffee cup slipped from my hands, shattering on the table and spilling hot coffee everywhere. Margaret quickly grabbed napkins and started cleaning it up, but I barely noticed. He was dying. For 2 years he was dying. Not 2 years, but for most of the time since your fight. Yes. He didn't want to tell you because he was afraid you would come back out of pity, not because you had forgiven him. He wanted to earn your forgiveness first. I felt like I was drowning. All this time, I had been angry at him for not calling, for not reaching out. But he had been dying, and he had been too proud to use his illness to manipulate me into coming home. Why didn't Victoria know? Margaret's expression darkened slightly. Oh, she knew. Your father told her about the diagnosis almost immediately. He needed someone to help him manage the business while he went through treatments. She knew he was dying, and she never called me. Elena, there's something else you need to understand about your sister. Something your father discovered during his illness that changed how he felt about both of you. She reached into the folder and pulled out a different set of documents. These are financial records from Martinez Construction over the past 2 years. Your sister has been embezzling money from the company. I stared at the papers, trying to make sense of the numbers and accounts listed there. How much? Almost $400,000. She's been using company funds for personal expenses. The house she and Marcus bought last year, paid for with company money. Her luxury cars, her shopping trips, even their vacation to Europe, all paid for by stealing from your father's business. Did he know? He found out about 6 months ago. That's when he changed his will for the final time. Originally, he was going to split everything between you and Victoria equally. But when he discovered the theft, and when he realized that she knew he was dying but chose not to tell you, that's when he decided you should inherit the business. I couldn't process this. My sister, who had always been the responsible one, the successful daughter, had been stealing from our dying father. There's more, Margaret said softly. The day of your father's funeral, before the will reading, Victoria was at the bank trying to access his personal accounts. She had forged his signature on withdrawal slips, trying to take as much money as possible before the estate was settled. Oh my God! The bank called James Whitfield when they became suspicious. That's why he seemed so prepared for her reaction today. He already knew what kind of person she really was. I sat there in that diner booth, surrounded by the evidence of my father's love and my sister's betrayal, trying to understand how my life had changed so completely in just one day. Elena, Margaret said, there's one more thing. Your father recorded a video message for you. He wanted you to watch it after you learned everything else. Are you ready for that? I wasn't sure I was ready for anything else, but I nodded. Margaret pulled out her phone and opened a video file. My father's face appeared on the screen, looking older and thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were bright and alert. My beautiful Elena, his recorded voice said, if you're watching this, then Margaret has told you everything. About the investigation, about my illness, about Victoria's betrayal. I'm so sorry you had to learn all of this at once. Even through the small phone screen, seeing his face and hearing his voice made my heart ache. I need you to know that every day for the past 8 months I have wanted to call you. I wrote you letters that I never sent. I drove to your neighborhood and sat in my car outside your building, trying to work up the courage to knock on your door. But I was so ashamed, Elena. Ashamed of the things I said to you. Ashamed of how long it took me to realize how wrong I was, and ashamed that I was dying without making things right. He paused, and I could see him struggling with emotion. But I was also proud. So incredibly proud. Margaret showed me who you became, Elena, and you became everything I ever dreamed you could be. You're kind and generous and brave in ways that I never was. You chose to help people instead of just making money. You chose love over profit. You chose to be the person I should have taught you to be, instead of the person I tried to make you into. The video was almost over, but he had one more thing to say. The business is yours now, Elena. Not because I want you to change who you are, but because I trust you to use it in ways I never thought of. Make it something that helps people. Make it something that builds communities, not just buildings. Make it something that would make your mother proud. The video ended and I sat there crying in a diner booth, holding my father's final gift to me. Not just money or a business, but the knowledge that he had finally understood who I was and that he had loved me for it. 3 months later, I was standing in the conference room at Martinez Construction, looking out at the faces of 23 employees who were about to find out how drastically their lives were going to change. But this time, the changes would be good ones. In the months since my father's death, I had learned more about running a business than I ever thought possible. James Whitfield had introduced me to accountants, business managers, and industry experts who helped me understand exactly what I had inherited. Martinez Construction wasn't just a company, it was a community. These employees had worked for my father for years, some for decades. They had trusted him with their livelihoods, their family's security, their futures, and now that trust had been passed to me. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice stronger and more confident than it had been 3 months ago. "I know these past few months have been uncertain for all of you. You've been wondering what changes I might make, whether your jobs are secure, what direction the company will take." I could see the worry in their faces. Construction workers, project managers, administrative staff, all of them wondering if the boss's social worker daughter was about to destroy everything they depended on. First, I want to assure you that your jobs are not just secure. They're about to get better. Tom Rodriguez, who had been my father's foreman for 15 years, raised his hand. "What do you mean by better, Miss Martinez?" I smiled. "I mean that starting next month, every employee of Martinez Construction will receive a 20% salary increase. Additionally, we're implementing profit sharing, so when the company does well, you all do well. And we're expanding the health insurance to include full dental and vision coverage for you and your families." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Maria Santos, who managed the office, looked like she might cry. "But that's not all," I continued. "We're also starting a college scholarship program for employees' children. Every year, we'll provide full tuition assistance for up to 5 kids whose parents work here." Now people were really talking, turning to each other with excitement and disbelief. "How can we afford all of this?" asked Jennifer Kim, our project coordinator. "Because we're changing our business model," I explained. "We're not just going to build buildings anymore. We're going to build communities." I had spent the past 3 months developing this plan with the help of urban planning experts, community development specialists, and social workers from my old job. It was ambitious, maybe even crazy, but it felt right. Martinez Construction is going to specialize in affordable housing, community centers, schools, and other projects that directly benefit working families and underserved communities. We're going to partner with nonprofits, government agencies, and community organizations to create developments that don't just house people, but help them thrive. Tom raised his hand again. "Miss Martinez, that sounds great, but will there be enough work? Will we make enough profit to sustain all these benefits you're promising?" It was a fair question, and one I had researched extensively. "Tom, there's a housing crisis in Chicago. Thousands of families need safe, affordable places to live. The city, the state, and the federal government are all allocating billions of dollars for housing development and infrastructure projects. The work is there, and it pays well. The difference is that we'll be building something meaningful instead of just profitable." I pulled up a presentation on the large screen at the front of the room. "Our first project is already approved. We're going to build a 100-unit affordable housing complex on the south side, complete with a community center, a child care facility, and a health clinic. The total contract value is $8.7 million. The room was completely silent now. That was more than they usually made in 2 years combined. The second project is a partnership with Chicago Public Schools to build 3 new elementary schools in underserved neighborhoods. Contract value, $12.4 million. Jennifer raised her hand. "How did you secure these contracts so quickly?" "Because I know these communities, Jennifer. I know what they need, and I know who makes the decisions about funding. My old colleagues in social work, the nonprofit directors I've worked with, the community leaders I've built relationships with over the years, they all became resources for finding opportunities. What I didn't tell them was that I had also used my inheritance to make strategic donations to key organizations, not to buy influence, but to demonstrate my commitment to the communities we wanted to serve. Sometimes you have to invest in relationships before you can benefit from them. But here's the most important part, I continued. We're not just going to build these projects and walk away. We're going to maintain them, support them, and be part of the communities we're helping to create. Every Martinez construction project will come with a 5-year community partnership commitment. Maria raised her hand. What does that mean exactly? It means that after we build a housing complex, we'll provide ongoing maintenance and support services. We'll help residents access job training, health care, educational resources, whatever they need to succeed. We'll be partners in their success, not just contractors who disappear after the last nail is hammered. The more I talked about the plan, the more excited I became. This was what I had always wanted to do. Help people, build communities, make a real difference. But now I had the resources to do it on a scale I had never imagined possible. Over the following weeks, word about Martinez Construction's new direction spread throughout Chicago's construction industry. Some competitors laughed, calling it naive and unsustainable. Others were intrigued, wondering if we were onto something they were missing. But the response from the communities we wanted to serve was overwhelmingly positive. Community leaders who had never returned calls to construction companies were inviting me to meetings. Nonprofit directors were partnering with us on grant applications. City officials were fast-tracking our permit applications. Most importantly, the employees at Martinez Construction were thriving. The salary increases and improved benefits had boosted morale enormously. But beyond that, they were proud of the work they were doing. Instead of building luxury condos for wealthy investors, they were building homes for teachers, nurses, firefighters, and other working families. Tom Rodriguez told me one day, "Miss Martinez, I've been in construction for 25 years, and this is the first time I've ever been excited to tell people where I work." But not everyone was happy with the changes I was making. Victoria had been surprisingly quiet for the first 2 months after the will reading, but I knew she was planning something. Marcus worked for a competing construction company, and I kept hearing through industry contacts that they were spreading rumors about Martinez Construction's financial stability and my competence as a leader. The confrontation finally came on a rainy Thursday afternoon in November. I was in my office, reviewing contracts for our 3rd major project, when Victoria walked in without knocking. She looked different than she had at the will reading, thinner, more tired, and there was something desperate in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Elena, we need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. I looked up from my desk, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Hello, Victoria. How are you?" "How am I?" She laughed bitterly. "How do you think I am? You've destroyed everything, Elena. Everything Dad built. Everything our family stood for." I set down my pen and really looked at my sister. She was wearing the same Chanel dress she had worn to the funeral, but now it looked wrinkled and ill-fitting. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes. "What are you talking about, Victoria?" "This!" She gestured wildly around the office. "This communist fantasy you're playing out with Dad's company. You're giving away money we should be making, taking on projects that barely break even, turning employees into partners. It's not sustainable, Elena. Actually, our profit margins are up 18% from last year," I said calmly. "And employee productivity is up 23%. The business is doing better than it ever has. That's impossible." I pulled out a financial report and slid it across the desk to her. "See for yourself. When employees are paid well and treated with respect, they work harder. When we focus on projects that serve the community, we get more referrals and repeat business. When we build relationships instead of just buildings, we create long-term value." Victoria glanced at the report but pushed it away without really reading it. "It doesn't matter what these numbers say, Elena. You don't understand business. You don't understand what it takes to succeed in this industry. You're going to run this company into the ground, and when you do, all of Dad's employees will lose their jobs. Is that really what you're worried about? I asked. The employees? Victoria's face flushed red. Of course, that's what I'm worried about. These people depend on this company. They have families, mortgages, responsibilities, and you're treating it like some kind of social experiment. Victoria, I said quietly, I know about the $400,000. She went completely still. The color drained from her face. I know about the forged signatures at the bank. I know about the company funds you used for personal expenses. I know about all of it. She sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk, looking suddenly much older than her 34 years. Dad told you? Dad hired an investigator, the same one who investigated me. He found out everything. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. I was going to pay it back, she said finally. When? I don't know. Marcus lost his job 6 months ago. His company downsized and he's been out of work since then. We had bills, the mortgage on the house, credit card payments. I was just borrowing from the company temporarily. $400,000, Victoria. That's not borrowing lunch money. I know, she snapped, then immediately deflated again. I know it was wrong, but I was desperate, Elena. You don't understand what it's like to have responsibilities, to have people depending on you. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. For the first time, I saw past the anger and entitlement to the fear underneath. She was scared. Scared and overwhelmed and drowning in debt and expectations. Victoria, I said gently, why didn't you just ask for help? Ask who? Dad? He was dying, Elena. He was going through chemotherapy and radiation, and he was trying to keep the business running while fighting for his life. How could I tell him that I was failing at the one thing he trusted me with? You could have told me. She looked up at me with surprise. You! We hadn't spoken in 2 years. You hated the business, hated everything Dad stood for. Why would you have helped me? Because you're my sister. The words hung in the air between us. Victoria started crying. Not the angry, frustrated tears I had seen at the will reading, but deep, exhausted sobs that seemed to come from somewhere she had been hiding for a long time. I'm so tired, Elena, she whispered. I'm so tired of pretending to have everything together. Marcus and I are 3 months behind on our mortgage. The credit card companies are calling every day. I've been taking anxiety medication just to get out of bed in the morning. I reached across the desk and took her hand. She didn't pull away. Victoria, what if I told you there was a way to fix this? She looked up at me with hope and skepticism warring in her eyes. What do you mean? What if I told you that Martinez Construction could use a director of business development? Someone who understands the construction industry, who has connections with suppliers and subcontractors, who knows how to manage complex projects. Elena, I can't work for you. It would be too weird, too awkward after everything that's happened. Not work for me, I corrected. Work with me, as a partner. She stared at me like I had lost my mind. You want to make me a partner? After I stole from the company? After the way I treated you? I want to give you a chance to be part of building something meaningful, I said. The skills you have, the experience you've gained managing the business side of construction, we need that. I know how to work with communities and identify opportunities, but I need someone who understands the operational side of running a construction company. What would that look like? You would oversee project management, handle vendor relationships, manage the financial side of contracts. You'd receive a salary comparable to what you were making before, plus profit sharing like all our employees. And there would be a path to paying back what you took from the company. Victoria was quiet for a long time, thinking, why would you do this for me, Elena? After everything I've done, everything I said about you. Because Dad's letter didn't just tell me about his love for me, Victoria. It also told me about his disappointment in how our family had fallen apart. He said that his biggest regret wasn't the fight with me. It was that he had raised 2 daughters who couldn't support each other. I pulled out another envelope from my desk drawer. He left this for you too. I wasn't sure if I should give it to you, but after today, I think you need to read it. Victoria took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter much shorter than mine, but written in the same familiar handwriting. "Victoria," she read aloud, "I know about the money. I know about the fear and desperation that led you to take it. I also know that you have been carrying the weight of my illness and the business largely alone, and I am grateful for that sacrifice. I failed you by not teaching you that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. I failed both of my daughters by not teaching you to rely on each other. I hope that someday you and Elena will find your way back to being sisters instead of competitors. You both have strengths the other needs. Elena has compassion and vision. You have practical skills and business acumen. Together you could build something neither of you could create alone. I love you both. Dad." When she finished reading, Victoria looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. He knew. He knew about the money, and he still left me an inheritance. He knew that you made mistakes, but he also knew that you made them out of fear, not greed. There's a difference. I don't deserve this, Elena. I don't deserve your forgiveness or another chance. Maybe not, I said. But Dad believed in second chances, and so do I. The question is, do you want to be part of building something better, or do you want to keep carrying this guilt and anger around for the rest of your life? Victoria wiped her eyes and looked around the office. Dad's office that had become mine, but could become ours. What would I have to do? First, you'd have to commit to the new direction of the company. We're not going back to building luxury developments for wealthy investors. We're focusing on affordable housing, community development, projects that make a difference in people's lives. I can do that. Second, you'd have to work with our financial team to set up a repayment plan for the money you took. It will come out of your salary over time, but it would be manageable. Okay. And third, I paused, knowing this would be the hardest part. You'd have to trust me. Trust my vision for the company. Trust my relationships with the communities we serve. And trust that we can be better together than we ever were apart. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, considering everything I had said. Elena, she said finally, I owe you an apology. Not just for the money, but for everything. For the way I treated you growing up. For not telling you about Dad's illness. For laughing at you during the will reading. I was jealous of you for so long. I forgot how to be your sister. I wasn't perfect either, Victoria. I was stubborn and self-righteous, and I let pride keep me away from Dad when he needed me most. So what happens now? I stood up and walked around the desk, extending my hand to my sister. Now we honor Dad's memory by building something he would be proud of, together. Victoria stood up and shook my hand, then pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home after a very long journey. 6 months later, Martinez Construction had completed its first community housing project, broken ground on 2 new schools, and been awarded the contract to build a community health center that would serve 3 underserved neighborhoods. Victoria had thrown herself into the work with the same intensity she had always brought to everything. But now that intensity was focused on something meaningful. She managed our project timelines, negotiated with suppliers, and handled the complex financial aspects of our contracts with skill and dedication. More importantly, she had begun to find her own ways to connect with the communities we serve. She started a job training program that taught construction skills to unemployed residents of our housing developments. She organized our employees to volunteer with local schools and community organizations. She had discovered that success wasn't just about profit margins. It was about impact. The business was thriving in ways that went beyond financial success. Our employees were proud of their work. Our clients trusted us, and our projects were making real differences in people's lives. But the most important change was in our family. Victoria and I had lunch together every Friday, sharing stories about work and life, and slowly rebuilding the sisterhood we had lost somewhere along the way. Marcus had found a new job working for a nonprofit organization, and Victoria said their marriage was stronger than it had ever been. One evening, as I was locking up the office after a long day, I found myself standing in front of the framed photo of my father that sat on my desk. In the picture, he was smiling, wearing his hard hat and work clothes, standing in front of a house he had just finished building. "We did it, Dad," I said quietly. "We figured out how to be sisters again. And we're building something you would be proud of." As I turned off the lights and headed home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete. Not because I had money or success, but because I had found a way to honor my father's memory while staying true to myself. I had learned that the best inheritance isn't money or property. It's the love and wisdom that shapes who we become. And sometimes it takes losing someone to finally understand what they were trying to teach us all along.